The motivation behind a character's actions can be anything at all, but it must be believable. And the actions of the character due to that motivation must also be believable. Hi, I'm Isaac, and this is How to Write Your Screenplay, a step-by-step guide. To succeed in creating a believable motivation behind a character that leads to believable actions on the part of the character comes down to how strong that motivation is. But there are two types of motivations for a character. There's internal motivation and external motivation. Although internal and external motivation has to do with an emotional connection between the character and the problem, you have to understand that the one comes from that which the character feels inside personally. The other one, external motivation or outer motivation, has to do with the emotional response towards the threat that arises outside the character and is directed towards the character or something or someone close to him. So both has to do with an emotional connection of a character towards that which is happening. Therefore, is connected to those emotional feelings that the character feels on the level of his needs and wants being threatened and can have dire effects for him as a person. When you look at John McClane in Die Hard, his internal motivation was driven by the fact that he was going to lose his wife if he did not do something about it. Now I said, as far as characters are concerned, motivation can be twofold. Inner motivation and outer motivation. And that brings up the question as to what is the most important. That which is the most important depends on what the consequences to the character or characters would be, the most dire consequences. When you look at the film Die Hard, at first John McClane boarded the plane because he needed to speak to his wife because he was afraid that his wife would leave him. And he didn't want his wife to leave him because he needed his wife in his life. Then later on in the film, John's motivation changed as terrorists took over the building in which his wife was working. And they were threatening his wife's life. Now, when you look at John McClane, and the first reason why he went to see his wife, which was to speak to his wife because he was afraid that he would lose her. And John McClane did not want to lose his wife because he loved her and he had a need to have her in his life. But that need changed as his motivation changed. At first, his motivation was to save his marriage and to keep his wife in his life. But when the terrorists took over that building and threatened his wife's life, he still had that fear inside him of losing his wife. But now that fear was heightened. And because he did not want to lose his wife, he did not want anything to happen to her. So that is his internal motivation. But his internal motivation did not drive him into action. It aided his external motivation because it gave a believable reason to the audience as to what John McClane did later in that film. When the terrorists took over his building, his outer motivation sprang into action because he knew that they might kill everybody in that building if things should go wrong for them. Or they might kill anybody in that building anyhow so that they could not be identified by anyone. That threat that his wife might be killed drove John McClane into action. That action was the desire to save his wife's life. So the outer motivation did not come from John himself, but it was a fear that was created by the terrorists when they took over their building. So outer motivation comes from what the character feels inside himself, his emotional state, and the threat from outside, whether it is towards the character himself or towards someone that the character cares for. So let me say it again. Characters have inner motivation and outer motivation. Inner motivation comes from the needs and wants of the character, him or herself. Outer motivation comes from the threat that someone else or something brings to the character, or when that something or someone threatens someone close to the character. Or if the character is, for example, a detective who's investigating a case where someone has murdered someone and that person needs to be found. In other words, it's the character's job to find that murderer. So outer motivation can be any believable reason that forced that character to go into action to solve that problem.